Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bring Your App to the Big Screen. This session's all about designing TV applications, designing for Google TV. Before we get started, my name's Ossama Alami. I manage the developer relations team for Google TV, and I'm co-presenting here today with Michael Sundermeyer, who leads our UX team. Big fans of Michael. By show of hands, can I see how many of you are Android developers or have built an Android app? Great. So I think that's about half. And how many of you have built an app for Google TV, either Android or a web app? A smattering. So this session is going to be great for those of you that have built apps and great for those of you that haven't. The biggest thing to building a TV application is probably design, because it's very different from mobile or tablet or even PC or web design. Designing for TV is designing for a different user experience. So as a refresher, I'll go over what Google TV is for those of you that don't know. Google TV is Android, optimized for TV. It comes with Google Chrome, and it comes with Google services like Search, Discovery Experience called TV and Movies, Photos, YouTube, and other applications. And it comes with live TV integration. So Google TV is really about integrating the live TV with the web, bringing the best of TV and the best of the web, and trying to make it the best experience possible, bring as much content as possible to the user where they're looking to be entertained when they're on their couch in front of their TV. So last October, we launched a major update to Google TV. We vastly simplified the UI, the user experience. We improved search and discovery. We released a new YouTube experience for Google TV. And critically for most of you guys, we launched Android Market, now Google Play, and the ability for you to build applications and reach users on their TVs and distribute those applications through Google Play. So a lot of what we learned in simplifying the UI and making a better user experience in our second generation software, we're going to teach you about today. They're very exciting, the session next door. There we go. Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm sure you're all very excited about our new devices. We have new devices that launched this week, and over the last couple of weeks, they're out in the sandbox. On this level, I encourage you guys to check them out. I'm very excited about these things. They all have the ARM processor. They're shipping in the US, and the Sony devices are going to be available internationally. So Sony's released a Buddy Box, and they have a Blu-ray player that they're demoing. Vizio released Buddy Box earlier this week, and LG has a series of TVs with Google TV built in. And I'm happy to announce that later this summer, we'll be releasing an updated Google Play Store for Google TV. This will add some of the features you heard about yesterday, subscription billing support, partial updates, as well as the ability for users to purchase music, videos, and now TV shows directly from their TV. This is the first year we're doing a full track for Google TV at I/O, and I'm really excited about this session and the other sessions. I'm going to quickly tell you about the other two sessions we have. If you're interested about DRM, streaming video, and the enhancements that we've made to Google TV there, if you're interested about getting your content on TV, I encourage you to check out this session after lunch. And today, a lot of TV users are distracted users. They're sitting on their couch with a mobile phone or a tablet or a PC, a laptop, and part of the time they're watching TV, they're also on those devices. So if you want to learn how to build a unique experience that connects the user on their second screen device, on their mobile phone or tablet, as well as on the TV that they're watching, build a cohesive experience around your application, go to this session and we'll teach you a little about the technologies we have to make that possible. So why do you care? Why do you care about building for TV? You know, TVs have been around for a long time, and it turns out there are a whole lot of them. In the US, there are more TVs than people. On average, 2.5 people in a home and 2.93 TV sets. Now, this stat is actually going up. Even though the rise of smartphones and tablets, people continue to watch TV, people continue to buy TVs. This is really about meeting the user in the living room, right? Meeting the user where they're looking to be entertained. And they still want to be entertained on their televisions. And they watch a whole lot of television. In the US, on average of 5 hours of TV per day. So this is an opportunity for you guys as developers to finally meet the users where they're with this 5 hours of TV watching they're doing per day, as well as the other amount of time that the TV sits off. Think about an experience that is uniquely appropriate for the TV. And it continues to grow. So this stats by display search, by 2015, over 500 million connected TVs will have shipped, connected TVs or smart TVs. And that year, 47% of flat panels shipped that year will be smart TVs. So Google TV really aims to be an open app platform for you guys as developers to build applications and for manufacturers to build a smart TV. Users are becoming accustomed to having access on the content that they love on all of their devices. It includes the TV now, right? If you have an application that is meant to entertain or maybe inform the user, it's a great TV application. And users, as they get more and more familiar with connected TVs and smart TVs, are really going to want that app there. So reach and delight your users where they're looking to be entertained. And how do you do this? Well, there are two ways right now to build for Google TV. It is an Android device, so you can build an Android app, and it does ship with a full desktop version of Google Chrome, so you can build a web app. When I say build an Android app, it's really just that. The Google TV SDK is the Android SDK. What we're going to teach you about in this session is how to design that app for TV. But if you already have experience building Android applications, that's great. You already know most of what you need to know to build a TV app. And you get the advantage of distributing and monetizing that app and discoverability options through Google Play on Google TV. Or build a web app. Your site's already accessible on Chrome and Google TV, but what we're going to teach you here today is how to optimize that experience for TV viewers, how to make it really great on the web browser that we ship with. So those are the two options for building for Google TV. We're not going to go into the depths of how to build an Android app or how to build a web app. There's lots of sessions here at I/O that'll teach you how to do that. What we're really going to do is we're going to teach you how to design a great TV app. And since I'm not the expert on that, I'm going to call up Michael.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you, Ossama. Hello, everybody. I'm Michael. I head up the design of Google TV, and I haven't been with the team very long, but I've been designing for TV and mobile devices for many years, so I know enough to be a little bit dangerous. So this session is all about the experience you can create with the technology, not about the technology itself. So unlike most sessions, I'm not going to show a single line of code. So please don't go run screaming from the room yet. Hopefully we'll show a few things that are interesting and you'll learn something new. Google TV is really evolving. Google TV is not your grandfather's TV. TV has not fundamentally changed in the last 30 years since cable television came around until just recently. And now a few things have started to move around that are really changing the landscape of TV. First, the TV screens that we have in our homes are getting big. They're getting really big, huge. They're flat, they're thin, they're beautiful, and they can go anywhere in your home. They're appearing in places that we wouldn't have expected before, like kitchens and family rooms and bathrooms. They're appearing in our workplaces. So they're appearing everywhere. They're more like big screens that are just omnipresent in our lives. Second, they are smart. And smart, right now, more than 30% of all the TVs that ship in the United States are smart TVs. And that number is growing, as Ossama said. Pretty soon, pretty much all of them will be smart TVs. They'll have a CPU and GPU in the device itself, which enables web and applications and a huge amount of new content and new capabilities that we can take advantage of. And then third, they're interactive. They're new ways of interacting. The controllers that we have cursors on them and trackpads. We're starting to see voice. We're seeing gesture. We're interacting with them, just starting to be able to interact with them with our mobile phones and with our tablets and our computers. So there's a whole bunch of new opportunities around interaction. So I'm here to talk to you about how some of these disruptive changes to the landscape of really the living room present new opportunities for creating great experiences for the home that really connect us together. But here's the thing. So I think we're only just beginning to figure out how to create great experiences on any device. We're right at the beginning. We're in our infancy. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I still learn something new every single day. So I don't have all the answers here, but I'm going to present some of the things that we've learned so far and leave it in your good hands to take it from there. I'll start by talking about the big screen, what it's good for and what it's not so good for. You may not be aware of some of the differences there. Then I'll show you a few applications and how their developers used different strategies to bring Android applications, web applications from mobile devices and the web to the television. Then I'll spend a little time talking about designing, giving you some design tips for designing for TV around interaction and design and layout. And then finally, I'm going to share with you a few inside trade secrets for how to actually make a great application, not just usable, but I hope to inspire you to go beyond thinking about just the basics to creating an application that's beautiful and compelling and cinematic and that people really love to use. All right, so let's start with the big screen. So what's different about the big screen? Well, it's really big. And it's great for video and images and simple interactivity, anything that's really visual and cinematic. It's really designed, the 10-foot experience has been designed for consumption, so people are used to leaning back a little more, and I'll talk about that. And they're connected to big sound systems, so it's great for music and video. But what you may not know is there's a few things. A lot of people think, well, I just take my tablet application and I'll bring it to the TV and it'll work great. The TV is not a big tablet, actually. There's a few things that tablets are great for that TV is not so good for. For example, reading a lot of text is not great on a TV. Because you're 10 feet away, the information density needs to be less than you might think on a tablet. And because it's really a lean-back experience, there's something that happens when we sit down in the cushions, we sink back, we grab a beer and our controller, we dim the lights, and we go to watch something. We relax, and we're really in a different mode. And that may change over time as these devices become more capable. But for now, people really get into a certain mode, and they're not used to doing certain kind of activities on the TV that they might do on a tablet or computer. So really, we found that it's actually better to think of a TV more like a phone than in terms of design, than a tablet. If you hold a phone about this far away, that's about the size in your field of vision that a TV is 10 feet away. The amount of screen density, the amount of text, the amount of interactivity is about the same on a little device like this than it is on a big TV. So it's a little surprising that it's different than a tablet. TVs are also really social. Just all the same qualities that make a TV fantastic for watching movies, playing games together, make it great for shared experiences. But one thing that's different is that people are used to using a TV for entertainment and not so much for work. So it's great for games, for education, for apps that are around exploration, like maps and travel and food and things that connect to us personally. But people aren't so used to doing their email on a big TV. Some of you may do it, many of you may do it, but we're unusual. That we're a little different than the average consumer who still uses the living room as kind of a different space than an office. You also have to think about privacy, especially around social networks and financial websites and things like that. And you really need to think about multi-user and how different users may use the space and the applications differently in the shared space, how they use it separately and together. So not all applications that are successful on a phone, like I said, move over to the TV successfully. But it's pretty straightforward to move an Android application. If you've got an Android application, as Ossama said, you're already soaking in the technology. And then it's really just about understanding what are the main differences between the two in terms of the design and the interaction. Applications take different paths to get to the TV. And I want to show you 3 different paths in the form of application developers that have done it already. Pandora is a simple and elegant music app. You probably mostly use it. I love it. It's really designed on the phone. It's already designed really well. It's big. It's visual. It's sort of lean back. It taps into the sound system. So moving that to TV was really pretty easy. This is the phone app on the upper right and the TV app on the lower left. They really didn't have to change a lot for this application. One of the main things they did is just enable the transport controls, the play-pause controls on the remote control. So there's a couple extra things they had to do there. So this one is where they really used a similar design for both mobile and TV. CNBC took a different route. They tapped into the strengths of each device and did something slightly different. So on the phone, it's really good for interacting with your stock portfolio. On the tablet, it's great for reading in-depth articles. So there's a lot of text and articles. And then on the TV, which is great for video, they brought their video window to the foreground and made it really big. So there are common elements among all 3 of the platforms for this application, but they've highlighted different ones in different platforms. So they've really taken advantage of the strengths of each. Flixtor radically simplified their tablet application for the TV. So where their tablet application has a lot of text, they've removed almost all the text. They made big images, big fonts, dark backgrounds and gradients, made it more simple, both in terms of navigation and in terms of visually. So in this case, they just took their tablet application and they really simplified it and pulled some things out until it was right for the TV. So those are 3 really common strategies for moving to TV. Mapping it over pretty directly if your app is right, using what's the strengths of each application, of each device, and third, just simplifying what you've got on another platform. So now I'm going to dive into some of the basic design considerations for television in 3 areas. The first is interaction. So the almighty D-pad has been around for 30 years, and it just won't die. It's still around, and even in Google TV, you need to develop your applications so that they're navigable by D-pad. In this case, we've got 2 different kinds. I'm sorry, these are all 3. So Vizio, Sony, and LG all have a D-pad. They're slightly different. For example, the LG has a scroll wheel, which is really nice for scrolling. But the D-pad it's surprising, actually. There's a reason why it's stood the test of time. It's really a lean-back device. If you think about it, you don't have to look down. You can just put your arm at your side. You can really focus on what's on your screen. You can use it in the dark. It doesn't feel like work. You don't have to think about it at all. So there's a reason why it's actually successful, even though it's so simple. And that's part of the reason it is successful, is it is so simple. But it's surprisingly different. So we're designing applications for both TV and for tablet and phone. It's surprisingly difficult to make them the same sometimes, depending on the app. The interaction models are just so subtly different that you kind of have to decide in your application to go one way or the other. Really make it the same and kind of design to the lowest common denominator of the interaction model, or really make them different and take advantage of the strengths of touch versus D-pad and cursor. These devices all have cursors as well. All Google TV remote controls are required to have a cursor of some sort, but they have different kinds. So the Vizio and the Sony on the left have trackpads, and they have an integrated select button. You just push on the trackpad wherever you are. And then the LG has an integrated wand, very much like a Wii remote, but a little higher fidelity. And so what this means that you do have the ability to use cursor, and it's tempting to use that to emulate touch. But cursor doesn't quite equal touch. There's a way in which these devices have such a physical connection when you touch it. You reach out and you're touching and dragging and swiping the thing that you reached out to touch it taps into like hundreds of thousands of years of evolution of humans making that connection. Where with a cursor, you're 10 feet away and it's a little bit more work to try and grab the thing you want and move it. So it's just slightly different from, we found, slightly different from touch. And the other thing is that the way we do cursor on these different controllers is slightly different. So trackpad has some different strengths than a wand has. So what it means is not as consistent as touch. So for those 2 reasons, we recommend that people really design their apps around D-pad navigation first, and then use the cursor as an accelerator to that navigation. It's best for low twitch interactions like Angry Birds, and you kind of want to, the developers made me say this, you got to stay away from drag and drop as well. Sometimes the D-pad cursor, the trackpads are hard when you click and drag. It takes a fair amount of force on your thumb. And so if you use that as a main interaction model, sometimes some people have trouble with it. And then finally, you need big hit targets. The screens are so big, you think about it, just a little translation of angle here moves it a lot on the big screen. And so you really need bigger hit targets than you might have even in touch. D-pad is really a linear interaction model. You think about it more almost like the old-fashioned cassette tapes. I'm dating myself, where you had to fast forward through 4 songs to get to the 5th song. And then touch is more like RAM, random access memory, where you can just touch whatever you want. So because it's linear, you have to think more about the navigation that you're presenting to your users. The focus states and the layout help the user predict how to get from point A to point B, but they have to think about it a bit, and you need to think about it as well. It needs to be continuous. You don't want the focus to have to jump across the screen and between big states. In Android, the focus order tends to follow the way that the components are laid out in screen by a layout manager, for example. And so we find that it's better if you explicitly manage the focus in your application rather than letting the system do it. So there's 3 types of focus, 3 states actually. So there's selection, there's focus, and there's focused selection. So the first is really familiar. Selection is like, this is a tab, for example. This is the Shows tab of a TV and Movies app. The tab or a section of an application is a more permanent state. Not permanent, but it lives for a longer time. The focus state is it shows the position of the D-pad as the user moves the focus around. It needs to be big and really visible, like this blue glowing rectangle. I actually think that's not even strong enough. Maybe it could be stronger, because the user needs to be able to just look up at the screen and know exactly where the D-pad is, because everything goes from there. And then the third thing is you can, like a cursor, you can hover over a particular area, and with D-pad, wherever the focus is, we do things like after a second, if the user keeps the focus on that area, we can pop up a hover card like this and give more information. We can progressively reveal more info. So some views in Android, like the image views, they're not focusable by default. So the one code thing I'll say is you have to turn on the focusable attribute to turn this on. And we also think you should explicitly manage the order of focus. All right, keyboards, all remotes for Google TV have to have a hard QWERTY keyboard. They started out being big, and now they're on the backs of the generation of remotes that happen now. The one thing to think about is in the next generation, coming out next year, we're making the hard keyboard optional. And so you'll have to make sure that your applications support on-screen keyboards. It'll just be the standard Android keyboard. Each manufacturer will create their own variation of it, but it should work just fine, other than it will support D-pad and cursor. Okay. And the last interaction model, of course, is multi-screen experiences. We've seen a lot of great experiences like this mobile poker app. Zynga Poker's upstairs as well, where the table is on the big screen and each person literally has their own hand of cards in their own hand on their mobile device. But we've only just begun. I mean, this is brand new area of opportunity, so we're really looking forward to what you guys create. All right. A couple areas of design. A couple design tips. So this is the Google Music beta app from a while ago on the web. So what would be wrong with just putting this on the TV? Anybody spot any problems with this app? A lot of text. Not available in Australia. Make everything available in Australia. It's a very important design consideration. Yes, there's way too much text. The information density is very high. The fonts are really small. But really one of the big ones is, and it's hard to think about, is it's all white. In the environments where we watch TV, on these big screens, as they get bigger, it's like looking at a light bulb. You have so much light emanating at you in a dark room that it can be really blinding. So this is one of the biggest changes from the web, where most backgrounds are white, to TV, where most backgrounds really need to be dark. Also, you have to be careful about using certain reds and oranges. They vibrate and don't translate very well to TV. This orange might be okay, I don't know for sure. And then finally, this app is very text-heavy. You really want to think about how your application can communicate better visually. Visual things are much better on TV. Here's an example of the same app, a different part of it, but that's a little easier on the eyes on a TV and on these big screens, where there's a dark background, there's a gradient that gives a little bit of depth, makes it feel a little more cinematic. It's more visual, bigger fonts, bigger icons. And really, there's a lot less chrome and buttony kind of things so that the content can kind of breathe. All right, layout is a tricky thing because of the navigation. The first thing about laying out an application for TV is something that's been around for a long time. So let's take a simple UI like this and put it on an old-fashioned tube TV. And what you get is the edges all cut off. So those of us who were designing TV applications 15 years ago, we had to think about this thing called safe area or overscan. Because the tubes were not rectangular, the light guns couldn't reach the corners. And so each TV manufacturer had to reduce the amount of space that was available. And the problem was, so it was fine to just design with a safe area, just design to keep your application in the middle of the TV. The problem is every TV was different. The amount of space that you had to waste was really large because you had to design for the worst TV in the world, which I don't know what it was at the time, but it must have been bad because you had to put a big space around it. So you'd think that this situation is no more. But in fact, it lives on, but it's a little bit better. LED TVs still have this idea of overscan, but the overscan is less because we don't have tubes anymore. And Google TV actually added something where at install time, we ask users to calibrate their overscan. So they expand the maximum visible space of their TV so we can use as much space as is possible on that TV. It still means that there is some amount of your application that will not appear on some TVs, but it means that the top left will always be visible. It's guaranteed to be visible. It's the bottom right corner that may get cut off. And what we say is try to design around the idea, well, the moral really is use flexible layouts and try to design around keeping about 5% of the bottom and right halves of your screen not required to be seen by the users. They may get cut off. Next, there are two densities that Android provides for television. One is XHDPI, which is 1080p, and the other is TVDPI, which most people don't know about. It's fairly new. It's 720p. Now, what's the differences? You don't have to develop for both. If you develop for 720p, it'll scale up. 1080 will scale down if the TV is a 720 TV. So you only have to develop for one. The one thing you need to know about is there's a trade-off there. 1080p, of course, the image quality is better. The video quality is better. 720p, the performance of animations is better. Because you're pushing around roughly a third of the pixels of 720p, it uses less memory, less processor power. It takes less time to open images and that sort of thing. So you just really need to think about the type of application you have. Google TV uses 1080p for all of our applications. But it may be that if you're creating a game, you want to create 720 because the animation is so important. So it's just a trade-off to know about. In terms of layouts, you want to keep really simple, basic zones of layouts. Because of the wide aspect ratio of a television, it's typically better to put the navigation on the left and right than the top and the bottom. If you put it on the top and the bottom, you leave very little space for your content. So in Google TV, we use this pattern a lot. We use a global navigation vertically along the left. We put the content in the middle. And then we have an optional area of contextual menu that gives more options if you need it, but we typically don't use that very much. If you look at the YouTube app on Google TV, you'll see that it uses the contextual menu. There's a number of other patterns. Here are some. There's the shelf model that scrolls left and right. There's the grid model, which scrolls up and down. There's tabs. There's lists. So there's lots of different models. As long as you're consistent, you should be OK. The one thing to avoid is D-pad interaction traps. It's something that you don't necessarily think about at the beginning, but you can get the user in a pickle where they can't get out of it. So in this case, I've got navigation along the top and navigation along the bottom. If I move the D-pad to the middle, it's a scrolling list. So if I hit down, 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 it's actually scrolling down in the list. If that list has 100 things in it, you're never going to be able to get down to the navigation at the bottom. It's going to be like that guy that climbs one rise and sees the next rise and climbs that and sees the next one. They're going to keep trying to get there, and they won't be able to. So you have to be aware of that. OK, so much for the basics of designing a usable application. Those are the main considerations. Not a lot, but a few things to think about. So how do you make something that's great? If only there were a recipe book for great experiences. But if they're a recipe book, if I could just hand you this, then why aren't all apps great? Why is it so hard to do? Well, I kind of think about it like making movies. When you make a movie, there's no book to teach you how to make a great movie, a hit movie. There's lots of books on the mechanics of it, the techniques around lighting and cinematography and acting, but there's nothing that puts it all together. The greatness really comes in tapping into the deeper user motivations, what really drives people, what people love. So I want to share a couple of trade secrets in the form of 6 design principles that we use constantly when we're designing TV applications. Some of them may be familiar to you, but it's really in how you apply them that counts. The first is content is king, and you've heard this before, but it is the most important design principle in making a great application. Content is king. So much of application development involves thinking about layouts and UI and Chrome buttons and checkboxes that often we leave the actual content till the end. We neglect the content. But if you think about it, really, Chrome is just not the browser Chrome. The actual Chrome of the UI is a barrier between the user and what they really want, which is their content. So we say design the content, not the UI. Design the content, not the UI. So much so that I'll tell you a quick story. Once I was giving a design talk in the Bay Area a long time ago, and I used Bank of America online banking as an example of an experience that could be better, and to put it mildly. And I went into the reasons why. And after the talk, a guy came up to me and handed me his card, and it said, VP of User Experience, Bank of America. And I was like, okay, sorry. But he said, no, you're totally right. Let's work together to make it better. And so we started working together, and he said, okay, well, why don't you guys do a first pass and send us some wireframes, send us some ideas about what you want. I'm like, we don't work that way. We don't do wireframes. We design the content. We need user accounts. He's like, user accounts? I can't give you user accounts. It's like private information. I'm like, well, we design the content, and the user account information is the content. Finally, he relented, and he gave us his accounts. He gave us all his checking, banking, credit cards. For 2 years, he gave us all of his accounts. And we spent a week, all of us designers spent a week poring over that data and really looking at the ebb and flow of this guy's accounts, what he spent on, and when his PG&E bill was due, and when his rent was late, and all these things, right? And from that, we looked at patterns and what could we do to really help a user manage their finances. And really, it's a really clear example of really starting from the content, thinking from the content, and seeing it through the user's eyes. So here's another example on Google TV. This is an application called Redux. It is a beautiful, lovely, simple video app for Google TV. It really celebrates the content, which is, in this case, video. It pulls YouTube videos and puts them into curated channels. The video is full screen. The UI is not visible at all until the user calls it up. And when it does come up, it lives very lightly on top. It uses a lot of transparency and text and very simple icons. It's not big, garish, colorful buttons that are dragging you away from the content. It really keeps you in the experience. And really, the content's in charge here. The content's in charge, and the UI lives to serve. That's a great example of content is king. The second principle is less is more. I've heard this before, too. Mark Twain once said, if I had more time, I would have written less. Less is hard. Simple is hard. But simple isn't just throwing things out. Simple is about focus. It is about knowing what you're about. It is about knowing what your users need and when they need it, and only providing that at the right time. So we say focus on the 80%. And when we mean this, we mean really focus on the 80% use cases, the things that users do all the time, most users. Make those sing, make those great. Don't compromise on those. And make the 20% edge cases possible, but don't make them dilute the power of the 80% part of it. So we use visual hierarchy as well to emphasize what's important, and we use progressive disclosure to only reveal things that as they're needed, and we let the content breathe. So an example is here on the TV and Movies app. In the first version, we built it for scanning a lot of content. And so as you can see, we threw a lot of stuff on the screen. There's a lot of images. There's 3 lines of text for every single movie that you're looking at, or TV show in this case. And everything's equal. The weight, the visual weight, everything's bold. The text is almost all the same size. And when you look at users using an application like this, you find that their eyes jump around. They don't really know what to focus on. It's hard for them to parse and hard for them to navigate. So we redesigned this recently in a couple simple ways. One is we got rid of all the text. You don't need the text until you need the text. And we made the central shelf bigger. So the icons are much bigger. And we used this visual hierarchy, meaning the central focus, that central shelf is brighter and the others are dimmer. And then we added hover cards so that if your attention is focused on one thing for more than a second, then more information reveals itself. So these are just a few simple ways in which we made the application feel cleaner and calmer. It delivers just the right information at the right time. The third principle is movement has meaning. And a lot of developers seem to think that animation is gratuitous, and they leave it to the end or leave it out. But we actually use animation in very subtle ways and not so subtle ways to really communicate where somebody is and help guide and orient users. So we do this by creating physical relationships between the objects on the screen so that the users have a mental model of where everything lives and where it goes. Because, again, we've learned for 100,000 years, physical relationships in real world, that translates well to the screen. So to create an example of that, I didn't have actually a great example of this on the TV that I had the rights to use. So we created our own little example for you. And I'm going to run it through full-time first, and then I'm going to go back and try to scrub it with my trackpad here. So this is a grid of movies and or TV shows in this case, and we're going to tap, the user's going to click on Dixer, and it's going to have an animation into a shelf mode, and there's going to be piles that open. So you see a few things here. Movies by Ray Fiennes. And we're going to expand back out to the grid. Okay, so what's going on here, I mean, this looks like just animated stuff, but let's see, I've got to do it. I'm not seeing what you're seeing, so I'm going to have to do it here. Okay, so one of these transitions, we'll do the pile animation here. So there's 4 steps to this. So the user's going to click on the pile. Click on the pile. And first thing that's going to happen is the place that it's going to go, the shelf at the top, is going to zoom off to the left. See that? It's going to zoom off to the left at the same time as the pile's opening. Simultaneous to that, the content of this screen is going to fade out. So those 3 things happen simultaneously. And then fourth, the new content fades in. That fades a little fast, but we want it to feel snappy. So this is a great example of the movement giving the user a good idea of the physicality, the physical relationships. You open the pile opens, it goes to a place, you know where it came from, you know how to get back to it. And we actually are building a lot of transitions like this in Google TV now. It actually does require, well, it doesn't require, but we're using OpenGL to do it. So we actually have some developers that know how to do OpenGL. So it helps to have the language, the lower level language, both for speed, but also for things like lighting and transparency, and some of these effects are easier in OpenGL. Okay, the fourth principle is make it personal. Again, you know, we hear this all the time, but one size does not fit all, and yet almost every application that we build is the same for every user. And part of it is because it's hard. And so one of the things that we do is we try to have a little more modest goal, which is a technique we use is to make, just do one thing to make the 10th experience better than the first. Just one thing that makes it personal for this user. And an example, again, from the TV and Movies app, we added this ability recently to add your favorite channels. So you can select, you know, HBO, CNN, Bravo, Discovery, but we don't just show don't just show channels, we show what's on that channel at any given time. So that top shelf is what's on my favorite channels right now, all together, all at once. And so every time I come into the app, it feels fresh, it feels personal, it feels like it's made for me. But, and there are dozens of examples of making apps feel personal, from remembering states to learning behavior to providing new options. But you know, a way that we could go farther with this one, for example, would be if we notice that you're watching basketball a lot, we could offer to make a basketball shelf so that every time you come into this, it's got, you know, all your favorite teams right there and who's playing next, where they're playing, and how to get there. So the fifth one, surprise and delight is something we try to add to every application. And you can't do it everywhere because it takes time and it can be overwhelming. But we use a technique called Jewel in the Warehouse. And this is a technique that we borrowed from architecture. Architects know that no building built in the last 50 years matches their plans because of time constraints, resource constraints, money constraints. And so what they do is they latch onto one element of the building that is going to be their special element. They are not going to compromise on that. And so, for example, the reason it's Jewel in the Warehouse, imagine walking into this warehouse and the architect had built a beautiful curving staircase out of stone at one end. The user's focus would be so much on that gem, that element, that they wouldn't notice all the cruft in the corners and the things you didn't do on the sides, right? So there's a few companies that I won't name that do this really well in software, but the same thing holds true in software. And so we really try to pick one thing that we as designers and thinking about the user experience won't compromise on. And an example here is the Google Music app that has this carousel. And yeah, it's kind of flip and maybe a little bit gratuitous, but it's also really fun, it's entertaining, and it really anchors the application. It gives a center to the application. And the final principle, number 6, is create an experience, not a UI. People who design and build cars think about the experience that they're building. They build a lot of models, they drive a lot of prototypes, they build to think. They use the building process to think about it, what they're doing through the user's eyes. And they really solve problems completely from the user's point of view. So what they do, they use this technique called looking through the windshield, which is really, the concept car is a great example of this. They act as if they're users. They know that who they are and how they think isn't necessarily the way their users think, especially because they're spending so much time designing the cars. And the same holds really true for application design. You really need to get out of your own head and get in the user's head. And so we do this through user testing. So we've begun just recently to bring in users every single week into Google TV. Everything at every level, every concept, every model, every sketch, every mock-up, every prototype, every piece of code, we run through just half a dozen users every week. This takes a few hours, but it helps us to get out of our own heads and see it through other users, through the user's eyes, from their perspective, through their windshield. So this is a summary of these principles. Content's king, less is more, movement has meaning, make it personal, surprise and delight, and create an experience, not a UI. So let's see, I just want to leave you with one last thought, which is if you have the option, grab your local friendly designer and get their help and advice. Designers are trained to think in many of these ways. We read publications and websites and content about this stuff, and we think about it every day. Bringing your app to the TV shouldn't be that hard, especially if you're already in Android or building in the web. But it helps to know some of the differences between devices and some techniques like this to make it smoother. So let's see, I'll have Ossama come on. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully this gives a taste of the challenges. You want to go next?
Yeah. I'll note that there is a Sony party tonight. They're giving away 500 of their new devices. All you need is a Google I/O badge, and the first 500 attendees will get this device. If you want more detail, talk to the Sony folks at their booth.
It's a pretty cool device. I've been using it at home for the last couple months.
Yeah, I love their new remote.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes for questions. If anybody has questions and wants to grill us, you guys can't. You're not allowed.
Can I fire up?
Yes.
Okay. You know those devices you showed with the remotes? I don't know whether you have that information. Can we, with that cursor touchpad, those devices support like double touch? So double touch actually kind of drags it, and then single touch actually just kind of move the cursor like we do on the Apple or other.
You could build that. It's not, by default, that's not the behavior. But in your application, you could design such that a double touch activates drag.
But the hardware will support it?
The hardware will support it, yes.
All right.
one more note as you're leaving. The design guidelines that I referenced are available at this URL, and the slides will be posted as well. Next question.
Just quickly, the update looks really great. I think it was a drastic improvement over the previous UI. So thank you for that. One thing I noticed, some small things missing. Is there a reason why you can't turn off the screen? These are hooked up to audio devices. Is there a reason why you can't? Normally, you don't always want the TV on all the time if you're listening to music hours on end or what have you.
It's a good question. Some Google TV sometimes is built into the TV, so turning off the screen, I don't know.
It doesn't seem like it'd be like an intent or anything.
Means turning off the TV, right?
Yeah.
But you want the audio on, or similarly, like listening to audio while you're browsing the web. Those things seem to be still tricky to accomplish.
You should be able to do both those things. So
Yeah.
Pandora, for example, you can play Pandora and then go to web browsing. It should be able to multitask. But yeah, they're a little tricky to do.
Let's go over here.
Yes.
Yeah, so I had a question. So the Nexus Q was launched yesterday, and it seemed to be a cloud player from Google Play, whereas Google TV seems much more app-oriented. Is there any plans to merge the two and bring Google TV to the Nexus Q?
We can't comment on plans yet. The Nexus Q really is a device for streaming music and video from Google Play and from YouTube. And Google TV is really a platform that integrates web and applications and linear TV and is built into lots of different devices, TVs, and buddy boxes. So they're solving different problems right now, and we can't really comment on how or whether they might merge or come together in the future.
We'll do another one from here.
Yeah, I have a question about content. As you said, content is king, and we really don't have that much content outside of the US. And that goes for the entire, the Play experience. So Nexus Q is a perfect example for a device that just won't work outside of the US. And Google TV has the same problem because people don't have any incentive to buy one outside of the US. I was wondering if you guys had any a master plan to fix that?
It's something that we're constantly working on, local content and bringing more content to TV, both in the US and internationally. I think we, in many ways, we look to the developer community to help bring that content, especially local content, to the TV. That's why we built a platform that you can easily build for. But there isn't anything that I can comment on in terms of a master plan to work on that.
But we do, I really believe that it's, a lot of the revolution is going to happen outside of the US, especially because there's so many different experiments already happening in the UK and France and Korea, where they've got pure IPTV plays and they've got catch-up TV already on the web. And so we really look to countries outside the US to help propel it as well as inside the US. So you can be sure we're looking at that very, very closely.
Thank you.
Why don't we do a question from here?
Guys, thanks for rolling out to Australia. You might not have had a choice. It would be great if you could have lunch with the Google Music people and sort of encourage them to do the same thing. That would be awesome. So, question. Accessibility in Google TV. Is it early days yet? I saw a great talk yesterday about Jelly Bean accessibility and things have really come forward. Obviously the blind in television doesn't really work so much, but you've got captions for hearing impaired and so forth. Has there been much work done on that, or is it a bit too early?
We're built on Android, so when we upgrade to the next version of Android, we get all the accessibility. So we're really looking to the Android team for most of those platform capabilities, and we'll take advantage of them as soon as they're available.
But stuff that's uniquely video oriented is stuff that we're focusing on, like closed captioning. Yeah. Take a question from here.
It seems to me before Google TV can go mainstream, you probably need a different input method. Something like a simple joystick would be a lot easier. Are you guys experimenting with different input methods? Because a keyboard is, you don't want that sitting in the
Yeah,
living room.
we're definitely aware of that. We learned a lot of lessons from the first generation. Although, to be interesting, it's interesting that a lot of people actually do want, it's a narrow population, but for some people, a keyboard's really great. So as an accessory you can buy for your TV to do a lot of input, it's great. But definitely agree with you that the main interaction model, we need to evolve that. And I would love to bring something closer to touch, or we may leap beyond, but we can't comment on exactly what we're doing, but we're definitely
Of course.
spending a lot of cycles on it.
Thank you.
Over here?
So with respect to some of the design guidelines you gave and taking into account the fragments API that was introduced in Honeycomb to try and unify the APKs, like Flixer takes advantage of that to have one APK that works both on phone and tablet. Is there any way that you guys would hook into like default fragments that if people use them, you could sort of build in some of these design things, like it would automatically have a darker screen behind it. It would, automatically transition the text to slightly larger in list view, stuff like that.
I think we're careful. We are an Android device, so we're careful in not making assumptions on behalf of the developer. So we do publish, samples and libraries that make it easier to get started and sort of have our UI principles embedded in them. But in terms of changing the default of default behavior of certain Android widgets and fragments, that's not something that we're looking into.
But we really, like I said, I think we're really at the beginning of even figuring out how to make great designs on TV that can perform on all these devices. And as we learn patterns, we are really interested in figuring out ways to get them into your hands. Either if it's just a document that's written about how to do it, code snippets, examples, and so over time, I'm really committed to trying to get that out there. We win if the applications are great, and whatever we can do to support that, we will try. But we're not at a point where we have anything to announce yet. So.
Over here?
Hey, so you guys mentioned that personalization is really important, but the TV is basically the most impersonal object in the home, whereas everybody in the family uses it.
Mm-hmm.
A computer is really good at handling multiple users. A tablet's really good at being a single user device. A phone is being, owned by a single person. But the TV, it's something that everybody wants to use. So how do you manage the balance between, allowing everybody to have a very personal experience with still managing the fact that you don't want to alienate anybody that uses the device?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the fact that it's shared doesn't mean that it can't be personal. I think it can do both. Like the shelves that we talked about and adding favorites. We're looking at ways to add favorites for each person in the household. So it's still personal, but it's personal to each person. Also looking at ways that we can understand who's in the room and give recommendations that are different for two people than might be for each individual person, find overlaps. So there's a number of different ways we're looking at that, but yeah, you're right, it's a shared device, but we still want to make that experience personal for the people that are in the room at any given time.
Regarding the cool transition that you showed us, you mentioned you used OpenGL. Does that mean you had to throw away all the life cycle, and is that something you recommend, or how can we do that?
I can't comment, I'm not a developer, so I don't know exactly how they've done it, but I know that we're building some reusable libraries internally based on OpenGL that are exposed then to the Android layer so that we can use them in the right places.
And we're working on bringing those libraries to the developer community.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Can you comment a bit on the link with linear broadcast? Because most TVs still consume linear, even when you have a large on-demand catalog.
Yeah.
So how does Google TV, because you can't really do overlays over linear TV, because
Right.
commercial problems. So
Currently, we don't support any way to embed or overlay over linear TV, although it is a very common feature request from the developer community. I think we're trying to solve the user experience problem of how to do that right before we expose it to the thousands of apps out there. And we want to make sure that it remains a good user experience across all those apps.
I think you're going to really struggle
Yeah,
broadcasters would need to keep their commercial boundaries, and people can overlay adverts and everything, and it's a big security concern for broadcasters.
Yeah, we do the inverse, where we support PIP across all applications, so you can be running Chrome and still be watching your TV show, but the inverse is harder legally.
Go ahead.
Is there any plan to make the Google TV source code available, like making it open source? The platform source?
We have nothing to announce at this time.
Is there a reason that voice wasn't included as one of the, it seems like the most natural, Kinect's doing it, being able to kind of talk to your TV instead of trying to type things in and such?
Yeah, it is. I mentioned that it's one of the interaction models that are coming, but it's coming. So
Okay.
it's not it's not something that we're ready to talk about or announce or that kind of thing. So
You did allude to the time frame that the next release was coming out, though. What was that?
Just for the on-screen, for the keyboard becoming optional in the next release. That was the only thing specifically I talked about in terms
Okay.
of a release.
Was there a time frame? I think you said.
The next generation. So the current generation that's you see out there today is required to have a keyboard. The next generation is not required to have a keyboard. It's optional.
Okay.
So you'll see the keyboard start to disappear. But I didn't comment on the voice stuff.
It's worth noting that the LG remote and the Sony remote both have microphone input now that ties into Android search.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, basically, you guys are dealing with LG, Sony, and historically was the Logitech, and new devices going to be coming out. Are you doing anything about those devices which are coming out of China? I mean, just have the Android 4 on it or 2.3 on it. I mean, is there any control you guys have on those, or?
It's not really something I can comment about.
Yeah, there isn't. Android's an open platform. Anybody can use it.
Yeah, it has the Google Play, so you just publish your app, and I mean, it's good as Google TV, pretty much.
As we can attest, it's very, very hard to get everything working on a TV, all the codecs and all the new chipsets and different things you want to support. It's part of what we do for developers and for OEMs, is to do all that work for you and hand you Android plus, plus, that lets you focus on the apps and services you want to build on top. But if third parties, OEMs, want to build it from the scratch from Android, then they're welcome to.
Just a related question. Fundamentally, is there a difference between the 4 and the Google TV version of it, or it's pretty much the same? Android 4 and the Google TV version?
Google TV is heavily optimized for the TV watching experience. One of the most obvious differences is that we support linear TV. So we have an HDMI in and we do HDMI pass through. And it's really about bringing the web to the TV watching experience that users already have.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. I think we'll call that a wrap.
Thanks, everyone.